Hi, I'm your host, Dave Kemp, and this is Future Ear Radio. Each episode, we're breaking down one new thing, one cool new finding that's happening in the world of hearables, the world of voice technology. How are these worlds starting to intersect? How are these worlds starting to collide? What cool things are going to come from this intersection of technology? Without further ado, let's get on with the show. All right, so we are joined here today by one of the most reoccurring guests. I think you're right up there with Andy Bellavia now, Ryan Kraudel. Ryan, thanks for joining us.
Dave, thanks a lot for having me. It's great to be back and an honor to be in such good company of reoccurring guests.
Absolutely. So real quick, for those that don't know who you are, can you give us a quick background on who you are, Valencell, just your background?
Sure. Yeah. So I head up marketing for a company called Valencell. We make the biometric sensor technology that goes into wearable devices of all kinds. So the easy way to think about it is the green blinking lights on the back of a smartwatch or a fitness band, or in some cases, red blinking lights, which we'll get into more in this conversation. Everything from smartwatches to fitness bands, earbuds, even hearing aids and other health and medical devices as well. So we build the sensor technology and do all of the advanced R&D and tech development, and we provide that technology to the device makers, help them integrate in that technology into whatever device they're building, and then let them go to market with a successful product.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I look at you as like, you're the guy that I always go to when I have questions around biometric sensors. And, when I think about the evolution of hearables and wearables in general, I always come back to this idea that health is going to play such a critical role. And, kind of at the root of that movement are the sensors that are being deployed to capture those different metrics. So Valencell, is a company that actually makes these things, and Ryan's been working there for quite some time. So he's very, very knowledgeable about this. And so when the news broke last week about the Apple Watch Series 6 and the new, basically the blood oxygen sensors, that are going to be embedded inside of the new Apple Watch, I immediately went to Ryan. I was like, can we get on the podcast and go through what this means? Because again, I just think this is a super interesting path. And before we really even kick things off, I wanted to read a quote from a article that Horace Dadu wrote. So people that are familiar with Horace, he's at Asimico on Twitter. He's just a really, really knowledgeable Apple analyst. And I think that a lot of what he says really resonates. And I think what this piece that he recently wrote, I thought would be a really good way to kick things off for this whole conversation today. So basically in this piece, I won't read the whole thing, but he's outlining all these different things that the Apple Watch can do, right? The watch can track all physical activity and provide motivational reminders to meet daily goals. The watch can monitor exercise with precision and provide data that helps you improve your performance. The watch can also be used to pay for your groceries at the register. And so he goes on and on, and he's just talking about all these different things that the watch can do. And he says, the reason the watch can do all these things is because it's a computer. It's a computer with a dual core processor based on the A13 Bionic chip, also used in the iPhone 11, blah, 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 blah. But although being a computer allows the watch to do all this and more, no PC can do even one of these things, nor does a PC have GPS or cellular connectivity or NFC, and is certainly not swim-proof. And so I thought, like, this is so interesting because when we think about the computerization of wearables, right, and like this idea of body-worn computers, for the first generation, they were pretty pedestrian in what they could do because there wasn't a whole lot of unique things that they can do. But as they've graduated into being more sophisticated in the sensors that they have embedded in them, they're starting to tackle use cases that no other type of device can really do. And I think that the main use case that all of these kind of revolve around, particularly when it comes to wrist-worn wearables, is health. And clearly this is the position that Apple's taking. So let's just start right there.
Yeah, it's well, very clearly at a macro level, there's this convergence going on of consumer wearable devices and traditional health and medical devices. And Apple and others are certainly leading the charge from the consumer side of things in becoming personal health devices, if not outright medical devices. And the latest instantiation of the Apple Watch is just takes it further down that path for the Apple ecosystem. And I thought that the way obviously Apple is extremely good at marketing, and the way they position their products and the capabilities are really telling, mainly because of not just where they focus but also what they don't say. And if you look at the promo video around the latest version of the Apple Watch, it's the future of health is on your wrist. And that's the future of health is really, I think, succinctly summarizes Apple's vision for this market and where they are focusing their product and their business strategy. And the latest version of the Apple Watch with the pulse oximetry capability is certainly taking it further down that path.
Yeah, and I think like I go back to I think it was Jeff Williams was talking on stage. I think it was when they introduced the ECG monitor, and I always cite this quote, but it's he referred to him as an intelligent guardian of health. And I think that's when they really understood that that's where the Apple Watch's niche really resided was in health. And so it's not surprising to me that they've sort of continued to just kind of double down on that. And now, like you said, the whole promotion video it's like almost entirely about health. It's about fitness. It's about wellness. So let's just start to get into this blood oxygenation and the pulse oximeter. Let's start with the pulse oximeter. Can you give us the science behind why this thing works? Like you mentioned at the top, if you have an Apple Watch, you've probably noticed before that it emits a green light, right? Like that's the PPG sensor that's emitting that. So that's green. Why is this pulse oximeter red? How are these things going to kind of like work in tandem? Just really curious to learn the whole science behind this.
Sure. Um, so PPG sensors have become the dominant sensor technology in wearable devices, primarily because of their ability to measure a variety of different biometric signals and indicators through one body location, one sensor technology. And the vast majority of PPG sensors in the market today are using green or some wavelength right around the green area to measure heart rate and heart rate variability and other biometrics. What's different about SpO2 is, there's a few things, but let's start with what is SpO2. And that's what SpO2 is measuring is, and most people think about it as or describe it as blood oxygenation, and that's an accurate description. It's actually SpO2 is a measure of the percentage of hemoglobin or the red blood cells in the blood that are carrying oxygen. And for most healthy people, that's somewhere in the 95 to 99% of those red blood cells are carrying oxygen. That's a normal reading, and the vast majority of people and readings you'll see on a pulse oximeter will come into that range. What is important about that is that it provides some early indications of when there are issues with oxygenation in the blood. So obviously, your blood needs to get perfused throughout the body, so different organs and tissues can use that oxygen from the blood in order to generate energy and the other bodily functions that are necessary. And so, what this is doing is measuring that oxygenation in a very similar way to the way it measures heart rate. But the reason it's using red, and actually what you don't see, is it also uses infrared. Every SpO2 sensor uses both red and infrared. And that is it's a mechanism to measure the oxygenation in the blood based on the different absorption patterns, because oxygenated blood absorbs light in different ways than deoxygenated blood. So a blood that's already either has not picked up an oxygen or has already dumped its oxygen where it needs to go. And so the different absorption patterns between the red and infrared signals give you an indication of that blood oxygenation that can then be turned into a percentage of, through algorithms, can be turned into a percentage of hemoglobin that's actually carrying oxygen. And so that's essentially what's going on there. The interesting thing, and the reason this has been able to be added to wearable devices now. First of all, this has been around for many decades and goes. Oh, did you?
No, I
Was
was
there a
just saying,
question there,
yeah,
Dave?
like, no, I'm saying pulse, like for the
Yeah,
finger.
like the finger clips. Yeah, exactly. Where and they're still used in hospitals and healthcare facilities. But that technology goes way back. Actually, it originated I believe in the 40s. But for the first large scale commercializations were in the late 70s and early 80s. And later into the 80s, it became the standard of care in hospitals and healthcare facilities. And but what's different is those finger clips and the earlobe clips, that they're using what's known as transmissive PPG sensors. So transmissive being it shines light all the way through the body. So in those finger clips, there's an emitter on one side and a detector on the other side of your finger. And so that light, both red and infrared, is going all the way through your finger to the detector on the other side. That's not how wearable devices work, and it's been challenging to use or put these in wearable devices, SpO2 sensors in wearable devices, mainly because of the way. So most wearable devices are on the wrist or on the body, or in some cases in the ear. Um, but the transmissive nature of the previous generations of that technology are challenging because it the light trying to go all the way through the wrist versus all the way through the finger just doesn't work. But at the same time, you need the red and infrared signals to be reflected back. And most of the wearables today, most of the green light PPG sensors in those wearables are using reflective PPG, not transmissive PPG. So it's measuring how much light is actually reflected back based on the capillary blood flow. So the challenge has been, okay, how do you, and red and infrared light penetrate human tissue much further than the shorter wavelengths and the greens and blues. And so the problem is that light shines too far into your wrist. And the problem has been it shines too far. And so through different techniques, both from a hardware and an algorithm standpoint, and of course adding machine learning and AI techniques to that data, we've been able to use that same technology in red and infrared channels using more of a reflective mode as opposed to a transmissive mode in a device that's worn on the wrist. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. And I just find this to be such a modern marvel. Like we don't appreciate these things, I don't think, as much as maybe, we take it for granted. It's amazing to me that, like you've mentioned it before on the podcast, but a big reason behind all this is the data science. Like it's the machine learning algorithms, it's the ability to take this data that previously had just maybe been incomprehensible, to anybody that's looking at it. They don't know what they're looking at, but when you feed it through these sophisticated algorithms, so there's been massive leaps on the data science side. And then I think this is just so fascinating that, like, I never knew, the finger pulse oximeter, like what that thing's doing. I would bet the majority of people that are listening to this right now have worn one of those at some point of their life and couldn't tell you what exactly was going on there. They just know that it's detecting this, and it's reading the saturation of the actual cells in your body using lasers. And the fact that now you have these reflexive lasers, it's just unbelievable to me. And again, I think that sort of speaks though to the significance of these wearables, is that we on the surface look at these as like, this is a cool, like kind of like a neat watch that can do all these different things. But when you really kind of start to break down like how it's doing all these things, it's truly remarkable, and it's going to lead to some really fascinating use cases. And I think that one of the things about Apple that they do really well is they really sort of, they have like particularly with the wearables, they have these marketing messages and they're positioning it largely around fitness, right? Like there's plenty of disclaimers that say with the ECG monitor and with the now the pulse oximeter, these are not intended for medical use. You know, these are not intended to be a replacement. Um, and so they come at them with these applications that are largely around fitness and, you know, having like these training and these like for high intensity like types of workouts and stuff like that. But I think that, as you can probably attest, there's some really interesting medical applications that can be gleaned from this as well. And again, it's always going to be framed under this guise of, this is not intended to be a medical device. Like they're not FDA grade 1 medical devices. And there's a lot of regulatory implications that stem from that. But we've talked about this before, where it's like, even just being able, like if it relates to COVID, for example, like when we did the podcast with Andy and we had Chris Economos on, you know, just even like this pilot light idea where it's like, you might have something going on, like this myriad of sensors and the metrics that it's capturing in combination, they're kind of, you know, regurgitating out this result that is like, pilot light is on, you need to go see a doctor. And that to me is what's so exciting about this, is even just directionally being able to see, I might have something going on that's funky. Whether it be AFib with, you know, the ECG monitor being able to detect abnormalities in my heartbeat, or with this, you know, blood oxygenation, I'm about to go to bed and I have real low levels of blood oxygen. And so I think that's where this is all starting to get really interesting, is that it's this idea of transforming the wearable into a true intelligent guardian of health, preventative health tool, whatever you want to describe it as. But the more layers of complexity in terms of what you're capturing, and in combination, you know, with what you can glean from those insights in aggregate, that's to me where this is all getting really interesting.
Yeah, and there's a lot to unpack there. That triggered a bunch of thoughts. But so we've talked about sensor fusion before, and this is another example of that. We're now in a single wearable device, and by the way, the Apple Watch is not the only one. There are devices from Garmin and Fitbit and
For
Withings
sure.
and Amazfit and others
Whoop.
that have all, and Whoop too, but that have all of this sensor technology as well. Um, but this is a good example of how you can start to triangulate an individual's personal baseline in understanding what their average blood oxygenation levels are, what their ECG looks like, what their resting heart rate looks like, what their activity levels are. All of these things, and to your point earlier, the all in a body worn device that is now a computer on your wrist or in your ear or on your arm, wherever it might be, that has all of those capabilities to be able to establish that personal baseline. Um, and I think that's critical, and we'll come back around to that in a moment. But I don't want to lose a point you mentioned earlier, or a topic you touched on earlier, which is the whole medical grade and regulatory aspects of what they announced, specifically around SpO2, because SpO2 in a regulatory environment is interesting. It's one of the few areas that the FDA has determined that it can be used for both general wellness and for clinical applications. So some SpO2 monitors are FDA 510K cleared, others are used for just general wellness. And all of the consumer wearable devices, Apple, Garmin, Fitbit, all the ones that have SpO2 capabilities today, and some of the pulse ox clips even are not FDA cleared, just for general wellness purposes. The finger clips from companies like Nonin and others are, and Massimo is another big one. Those are all FDA cleared 510K devices that are primarily used in hospitals and healthcare facilities, in surgery centers to track pulse ox under anesthesia, that kind of stuff. But it was interesting to me that Apple chose not to go down the 510K clearance path in the case of SpO2, whereas they did with ECG. And so that tells you a lot. But if you looked at the announcement, it was where it is not FDA clear. This SpO2 is general wellness, but we've announced 3 different partnerships with medical research
Right.
institutions to study the efficacy of this technology in this watch in certain use cases. So they've essentially gone, I won't say they've gone around the FDA, but in this case, they've said, this is a general wellness device,
Mhm.
but we're partnering with these medical research institutions to demonstrate the efficacy of the technology in medical use cases. And so that I thought was brilliant, in looking at using a general wellness device for demonstrating true clinical outcomes. And I'm excited to see how those turn out, and with other devices, not just Apple devices, in the market as well, because you're starting to see more and more of this where consumer general wellness devices are working with medical research
Yep.
institutions to demonstrate the capabilities and the efficacy of the outcomes that these devices can help accomplish.
And before you lose your train of thought, because I want you to continue on with what you're saying, but I just want to interject really quickly because I think it's a point worth making, which is that I know that I can be a bit of an Apple fanboy sometimes, and sometimes you got to give credit where credit's due. This is extremely important that Apple developed Research Kit, because by doing so, they now have this amazing sort of like conduit into different research facilities, whether it be universities or all these different like medical facilities. And they can, just like you said, they can kind of skirt the FDA in a way where they can go and they can say, well, this is a consumer grade device, and we're going to work with all these universities through Research Kit, which is basically their API that they can feed all this data in such a way, and they can basically legitimize their device through those studies. I just want to point that out because it is something that only Apple is doing, and it's something that you're seeing the fruits of a kind of a more obscure, kit, that I think the one of the primary reasons behind Research Kit is so that they can kind of further legitimize the medical applications of their wearables.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the biggest barriers to adoption of wearables as medical devices, or within the daily standard of care for medical practitioners, is the demonstrated evidence and peer reviewed science around the outcomes that these wearables can help deliver. And that's what Apple and others are doing now, is taking these devices, putting them into clinical trials and research studies, and just getting them deployed widely out in the field, where they can do their own research on how these devices are actually being used around activities of daily living with people who have different health issues they're dealing with, and how these devices can surface insights around those health issues as an early warning sign to be able to help them get care more quickly and hopefully more effectively, to be able to head off a potentially dangerous disease or health condition before it gets past the point of no return.
So let's get in a little bit about what we can actually glean from these metrics. I know blood oxygenation. There's also some different implications I think this has with VO2 max. So can you speak to, from a fitness standpoint, what we might be able to, like what kinds of things you can learn from this and how that's relevant to athletes all the way down to just people that are wearing the watch and not super active? And then I want to get into what are some of the different potential medical applications that you can glean from, say, medical grade pulse oximeters. I'm curious to just kind of break down some of the different things that you can garner from this.
Yeah. So let's stick with SpO2 for a moment. Most of that. So I mentioned the clinical uses mostly in surgery and tracking oxygenation under anesthesia, so they can titrate the dosages of the anesthesia or the ventilator or whatever it might be. That's more in clinical applications. In the consumer general wellness applications, the not for medical use applications, most of that is around respiratory conditions. So things like asthma and COPD. You'll see a lot of asthma and COPD patients carrying around the pulse ox clips to try to head off or get an early warning sign of an asthma attack or a COPD complication. Another big area is around sleep apnea. So with sleep apnea, you see severe drops in blood oxygenation because you literally stop breathing, and as part of that's the condition of sleep apnea. So that obviously drops your blood oxygenation, and so this is again a way to see early warning signs of sleep apnea that can lead to some much more serious health conditions. And then, of course, in the context of this pandemic environment we're in now, there's the use of SpO2 monitors as again an early warning sign for respiratory conditions, whether it's pneumonia or flu or something more severe like COVID, to be able to see some indications where a lot of people, particularly with COVID, don't show any symptoms or any signs, or if they are, they're very mild. But when you look more deeply and have the ability to look more deeply with something you're wearing on your wrist anyway, that can give you some of those early warning signs that can indicate something is going on. And again, back to that personal baseline. When there's a deviation from that baseline, you may not know exactly what it is, and the watch or the wearable or the hearable is at least for the foreseeable future not going to be able to diagnose what's going on, but they can at least provide a warning signal to say, hey, you need to check into this because this is a deviation from your baseline that indicates something is going on. So look deeper, figure out what's going on here, and then take action to avoid that. The capability around atrial fibrillation and
Mhm.
arrhythmias that's been around now for a few years with wearable devices is a good example of that, where the watches use, or the wearables use, the PPG sensor to track irregular heart rhythms and then trigger someone to take an ECG reading to get a higher acuity reading of what's actually going on, whether that's through the device or at their doctor's office.
Yeah, and I should say too, like one interesting thing, using the heart rate monitor on the watch and juxtaposing it with the pulse oximeter now is that with the heart rate monitor, just like you said, in order to perform an ECG on your watch, you actually have to manually do it. But with the heart rate monitor always sort of being active, you will get a notification if you're sitting and your heart rate spikes for a unknown reason.
Yep.
And what's interesting about this is that it's kind of the same thing that, and again, it's kind of a testament to how amazing some of these wearables are. It's going to maintain the same battery life. You have all these new sensors embedded, and it's going to be able to periodically issue the blood oxygen readings. And so more times than not, it will probably be in the background and you won't even notice it, but it will be logged in your health app. So you will be able to actually have a log of data. But I think that where this gets interesting is, with the heart rate kind of being like this, method to maybe detect AFib, it should be noted that along with the blood oxygenation with this new watch, another big theme was sleep tracking.
Mhm.
And so it would seem like sleep apnea could be the big kind of whale that this is going after. If you're going to be wearing this at night, might be a really good way to detect if you have sleep apnea. And that again, that's what I think is like, that's why I commend Apple with all this stuff, is that they're leveraging their scale in ways that the reason that you're probably wearing your Apple Watch isn't to detect AFib, right? The reason you're wearing it is because you like having this gadget. Now, some people might be actually looking out for different problems, but I think a lot of the people that catch these things they're like wearing them, and just by happen chance, through the like law of numbers and the law of scale, you're going to get some people in there that are like suddenly recognizing this, and then it becomes a recognized use case of the device where people say, hold on, this is actually a really good way to potentially catch some of these underlying issues that I otherwise wouldn't know about. And I think sleep apnea is going to be the next one that we'll see a whole lot of different stories written about people detecting it through the pulse oximeter that's periodically running as you sleep at night.
Yeah, and that's a good example of, and a lot of wearable devices makers do this, is they'll add sensor technology to the devices without actually announcing some of the capabilities. So Fitbit's a good example. They've had SpO2 sensors in their devices for several years now, if not longer, and but they didn't announce the SpO2 capability, because what they were doing is getting these devices scaled out into a large percentage of their users, and then using those devices as data collection endpoints to then advance their algorithms so they could then later announced the SPO2 capability. And you saw with, I think they just announced it recently as well. And they announced that several previous versions or existing devices in the market could now do SPO2 because the hardware was already there. They're just at that
Flipping,
point it's a software update.
yeah.
And so you mentioned sleep, and as it relates to the Apple Watch, I thought what one of the things the things they announced around sleep that was interesting, was how limited the sleep tracking was initially, or for now. It's basically tells you how long you slept, so when you went to bed, when you woke up, and that is essentially, oh, and the consistency of your sleep and in terms of your movement patterns. But there's with this sensor technology, you can do a lot more detailed sleep analysis and sleep tracking with these devices. So devices like Whoop and Aura and others do more sleep staging, sleep quality, sleep scoring, that kind of stuff. But Apple specifically did not announce that. But I'm sure you'll see it in
Hmm.
future, probably the near future, as they get, now they have your heart rate, your activity, and your SpO2 in the context of your sleep. And at that point, then you're going to start seeing more advanced sleep metrics, more insights out of these devices. They are going to have to figure out the battery life issue as a to get more people
Hmm.
wearing that while they sleep, just because of the limitations around that right now. But I'm certain that is something they are actively working on.
Yeah. Yeah, I would imagine so too. I actually just bought a Whoop, so I won't just be an Apple guy. I'm gonna try out another wearable. I feel like I'm gonna like run out of places on my body to be putting all these different gear, all these gadgets. But I'm the reason I did it was because, I'm I think this is going to be this whole like quantified self movement. I think is going to be such a big trend throughout the 2020s, and we're really just getting started. I mean, in so many different ways, wearables are they're finally finding their place in the market, and like we talked about at the beginning of the conversation, it feels like the biggest use case initially is going to be all centered around quantifying your like your biological physiological readings. And I'm curious to see like what other things you can do, and it seems like Whoop's kind of on the cutting edge with some of this stuff. But one thing I think that I wanted to get your thoughts on, when we had the conversation with Brett Bivens the last time you were on, we talked a lot about Apple Health as sort of this giant repository of data. And one of the interesting lines of discussion that we had throughout that is like, will Apple play nice with other wearable companies out there, both hardware and software? Or are they going to sort of treat it as if it's like this winner take all market? And I think we kind of both, prior to recording, we were talking a little bit about Fitness Plus. And I think this is really interesting for a few different reasons. I mean, on the surface, you can look at it and you can say, wow, that's really a shot across the bow at somebody like a Peloton, right? This idea where you get, it's another subscription, $10 a month or however much and there's bundles now too, with all kinds of, Apple TV and Apple News and all these different services that they're rolling out. But the idea with Fitness Plus is that, in conjunction with your wearable, you can like stream fitness classes to your iPad or your Apple TV or to your iPhone. And I think one of the most interesting aspects to this is that it has, I'm almost imagining you have to have an Apple Watch to do some of this stuff, or at least it's going to optimize it because it has the readout in real time on the screen. And I look at this and I say, that is the type of feature that I think is extremely compelling to people. And again, if you only have, you have all these different, like you have the mirror, you have Peloton, you have all kinds of these new interactive workout applications that are super computerized. The missing ingredient, I think, for a lot of those is like, what's my body actually, how's my body responding to this workout? Like, I think that's going to be for fitness nuts in particular. I think they're going to be really intrigued of like real time, like how many cardio or how many calories am I burning, and as much of a robust output as they can have in terms of how their body's responding to the workout that they're doing. And so I look at this and it kind of goes off of what you were saying about sleep, where it's like, in a way, I almost look at this as, Apple rolling out kind of these introductory, like you can get a bare bones experience if you use Fitness Plus or if you get the sleep tracker. But I kind of feel like where this is going, though, is that it's going to dramatically expand the market because you're going to get a lot of people that they're going to get this experience. And a Peloton, for example, with their newest bike, they have a gym kit integration. So you actually will be able to sync your Apple Watch onto there. And so I think that where we might end up seeing this go is that rather than really being a competitor with somebody like a Peloton, I kind of think that where the Apple Watch really fits in with a company like that is it's like a addition. It's like you can add your Apple Watch to the Peloton experience in the same way that with Fitness Plus, you can get this overlay with your, how many rings you've closed and active calories and what my blood oxygenation looks like, all these different metrics overlaid on top of my Peloton ride. It seems like that's going to be really, really intriguing to these people. So for me, I'm not sure if I view Fitness Plus as a competitor as much as I look at it as a way that Apple is trying to introduce more people to. Here is how you can sort of overlay the wearable data on top of a workout. And I think that's going to be really compelling to a lot of people. And I'll be curious to see if that makes its way into like these third-party integrations that seem to be on the roadmap as well. So what are your thoughts on Fitness Plus and how it relates to the third party economy, but also with, the wearables that Apple has?
Yeah, I agree with you. It is not a threat to Peloton at all. In fact, that's probably one of the best things that could have happened to Peloton, other than a pandemic. which obviously helped their business quite a bit.
Right.
But I say that only half jokingly. If there
Yeah.
is a silver lining or any silver linings of the pandemic, that may be one of them.
Hmm.
But so I see that as drastically expanding the market. Look at what the introduction of the AirPods did to the hearables market. It
100%.
drastically expanded. It was huge growth for Jabra and Bose and others as Apple
And
introduced
hearing
the AirPods
aids.
and hearing aids as well. Yeah, exactly. So this is very good for Peloton and Mirror and Tonal and all of these companies, because I agree they're more at the high end, and they'll feed all of that data back into Apple Health, and Apple gets what it wants with being that health repository. Where I think it is extremely threatening, and not just Fitness Plus, but just the broader trend of working out at home in general, is to the large gyms and any of the in-person workout facilities, where I've seen numerous studies now that say somewhere between 30 and 50% of gym members have no plans to ever go back to a gym. They're
Hmm.
going to work out at home. And it's driven by, obviously, the pandemic was a big driver behind it, but it's been enabled by capabilities of companies like Peloton and Mirror and Tonal, and of course now Fitness Plus. And so there's that element of it, but it's also an element of what these companies are doing is they're moving towards becoming using wearable devices and sensor technology, and of course the analytics that go on top of that, to really demonstrate how that workout or that service or that capability is impacting an individual's fitness and health. So you can point to, okay, I did these 10 workouts over this month, and my resting heart rate dropped, and my activity level went up, and you've got metrics now to show, okay, what I'm paying for a Peloton is worth it, because look at all these different metrics that are improving, and that's not possible without certainly the wearable devices and the sensor technology to go along with the fitness services, and that's not something that historically gym chains or many of the in-person workout businesses have ever thought about, or really ever focused on, I guess I should say, is demonstrating the impact that they're having on their members. And that's something that these at-home workout services and products are really moving towards and excelling in.
That is that is an incredible point that you just made, and you're right, because you're like, by making the data something that is directly tied to the work that you've put in. Again, it goes to the quantified self idea, is like when you can really start to break down and say, look, you did 10 Peloton rides this month, plus you, and so, that was synced to your Apple Health data or wherever that's residing. um I kind of think that down the line, like, we're going to get into a whole, like, another big theme of this, and I don't know how exactly it's going to manifest itself in the market, but it's going to be about what you eat. It's
Oh
going to
yeah.
be, I don't know exactly how that's going to get registered, but again, I think that it's going to be this idea of, for so long we've been, you're told things like, you shouldn't do this and you shouldn't do that, this is healthy for you, but we know that we're all, like, so different. And so I really, again, I keep reharping on this, but I think that one of the big things across this next decade, as we become more enabled through things like wearables, the sensors, the data science that makes sense of all this data, the repository which holds all this data, the integrations of how the data can, flow in different directions. I think that it's ultimately going to just kind of come down to the same conclusion, which is we're going to just be a whole lot more intelligent about the way our bodies respond to all the different things that we put our bodies through, the way that we sleep, the way that we eat, the way that we work out. And so people, I think, they're going to become obsessed with this. I think there will be a subset of the population that will become absolutely obsessed with this, in the same way that we always have people that are obsessed with diets and exercise and everything, CrossFit, you name it, these different things where it's I just think that there's such a massive opportunity that's really we're on the very early stages of. And I think that this whole idea of, each year, in the same way that we've been conditioned to expect a new iPhone with all the greatest innovation around cameras and stuff like that, we should expect the same sort of trajectory, but it's all going to be built around health. It's all going to be built around these new types of insights that you can capture, and allowing for a more robust data set that you can ultimately glean more types of insight from.
Couldn't agree more. Very well said.
So let me just ask you as we wrap up here, if you're looking through your crystal ball, where else is the low hanging fruit right now? I hate to use that term. I know it's like the most jargony term, but where is like the things that you think are, I mean, I feel like if I would have asked you last year, this probably would have been one of the things that you would have cited. I think actually you did in one of the different conversations we've had previously. But I'm just curious, like, what else should be on the radar, whether it be from a software standpoint or a hardware standpoint? What are some of those things that are more or less breakthrough innovations that are happening that are actually now feasible to put into a consumer device?
Yeah. So,
Without giving away too many of the secrets.
yeah, I can't go too far down that path, but I can say in general, where this is going is, and you're starting to see early signs of this with now some of this more advanced sensor technology, but the wearable sensor technology providing deeper insights into how your body is responding to whatever you're putting it through. And so that means more advanced metrics and more of and when I say advanced, I mean more deeper insights from a clinical or a medical perspective on your true health and fitness level. And so that's gonna come from a variety of different sensor technology, but also pulling more metrics and
Yeah.
more insights out of the raw sensor data that's coming into these devices today. And so you take that raw sensor data and start applying machine learning and advanced AI techniques to the large data sets that are out there. So you now look at, there's hundreds of millions of wearable and hearable devices out in the marketplace
Mm-hmm.
today, still in use, and that number is continuing to increase. And so all of that data coming in and starting to apply machine learning techniques, frankly, we don't know all of what we're going to find, but you're starting to see this advancement towards the consumer wearable devices starting to pick off different use cases and enable advanced insights into health and medical conditions that have never been possible before. And that's that
Mm-hmm.
combination of sensor technology across a broad scale of the population with machine learning applied to the sensor data that's coming in. And I think you'll start to see that. So, some examples in particular. So, respiratory conditions will be a big area of
Yep.
advancement, and cardiovascular conditions, and then also neurological conditions as well. So things like
Hmm.
Parkinson's and other neurological conditions along those lines, that where you'll start to see more and more advancements. And
Mm-hmm.
in some cases, FDA cleared wearable devices. In other cases, more like SpO2, that's just more of a general wellness type application. But more and more, you'll start to see that line blurring between a consumer device, quote unquote, and a true medical device.
I love it. I think that's such good applications that you outlined there. I would agree with you. One of the things that I find really interesting about the hearing aid market in particular is this idea of, capturing like what Starkey's doing around not only like Livio AI obviously has some of the accelerometer and the gyroscope data, but the cognition data they have, I think, is a really interesting precursor of what could come, around dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's,
Yep.
effects of the mind that, I would love to see some innovation around. So I agree with you. I'm so bullish on this whole space. I love to see the movement that we're seeing now, because I think that the more competition, the better. I think it's just going to fuel more and more types of uses. And for me, like we said at the beginning of the conversation, for a long time, wearables have been pigeonholed into like glorified, like step counters. And now we're really starting to see them graduate into, kind of they're graduating into their own. They're, like off to college. So I think it's cool, and I'm really excited to watch this whole thing progress. So thanks so much for coming on, really breaking down, what we've just seen Apple debut. And like you said, a number of other wearable manufacturers have already had, but sort of this new theme around blood oxygenation, what we can expect from it, and how it might ultimately evolve. So Ryan, I really appreciate you coming on today. Thanks for everybody who tuned in here to the end, and we will chat with you next time. Cheers. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Future Ear Radio. For more content like this, just head over to futureear.co, where you can read all the articles that I've been writing these past few years on the worlds of voice technology and hearables and how the two are beginning to intersect. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll chat with you next time.